Hey everyone, Delve here. Today I'm going to cover the Destruction skill in Oblivion. Destruction is the most quintessential way to beat Oblivion at max difficulty. Not only is it decent at low levels, but more crucially it is also extremely powerful at high levels as well. Unfortunately, it's also important to note that it does have some downsides, so it's hardly my favorite way to do things, and certainly weaker than the Marksman guide. It can also be a pain to pull off in some scenarios, so I don't necessarily think it's perfect or the easiest way to do things, but it is also probably one of the fastest ways to do things, with the least amount of grinding or preparation required. And you don't even need any custom enchantments, potions, or anything else like that either. For our race, either Breton or High Elf would be optimal for the bonus mana. Breton is nice because it makes it easier to be immune to magic, and this is sort of a low maintenance strategy, so it's my recommendation. Breton is also much stronger in the tutorial, and you will want to do the tutorial. The main downside to Destruction is that it's quite slow to level, so you will in fact want to kill rats and goblins wherever possible, just to level it up more. With that being said, Destruction is strong enough that you could probably get away with playing any race you wanted, although you may struggle in the tutorial, and you may need to kite really efficiently or just run past enemies in some scenarios. Whatever race you pick, I recommend the Mage Burst Sign. The Apprentice could also probably work here as well, but we don't really need the extra magicka it provides. 200 is plenty for what we're going for. For class specialization, obviously magic. Destruction is a pain to level, so we'll need every last boost we can get. For starting stats, I recommend Intelligence and Willpower, just to get us started a little bit faster. For skills, I went with Alteration, Athletics, Conjuration, Destruction, Illusion, Mercantile, and Restoration. Of these, technically the only required one is Destruction, so you will almost certainly want Illusion to go alongside it. Conjuration I also highly recommend to help increase your Intelligence stat. You could also go Mysticism or Alchemy here for that, but Conjuration levels up quicker than either of those. Alteration and Restoration are the only two others I highly recommend. Alteration is really useful for a handful of quests and as decent support effects as well, and Restoration is just nice to have. Technically, you could also probably use Restoration in place of Illusion to facilitate the main strategy, but I'll cover that in a future video. Athletics and Mercantile are totally optional. Athletics just makes you move faster, and Mercantile helps you earn gold early, but feel free to swap these out for any skills of your choice if you so wish. Now that we're out of the tutorial, our crucial goal is to get our hands on a spell-making altar. In previous videos, I've gone over gold making and Frostcrag Spire, so that's one option and it's certainly the fastest. To recap, you can either sell alchemy equipment in the Mages Guild, or you can turn cheap food items into potions and sell those. Alternatively, we can do the Mages Guild quest line, and while we're doing that quest line, we can level our skills, so it's not a bad choice. Destruction is a decent skill, especially at low levels, so as long as you know how, you can pretty easily get into the Arcane University. Now, it's important to understand how the Mages Guild questline works. We have to do various tasks in each of the guild halls, and we can technically do them in any order we like. Nevertheless, they're much easier if we do them in a specific order. The most important thing is that we take care of the combat-related tasks as fast as we can, assuming we are leveling up as we go. Alternatively, we can also just stay level 1 until after we've completed those tasks. Each time we level up, it will get significantly harder to complete 2 of these quests, and by around level 7 it starts to get impossible without making use of some other tricks, so I recommend just not leveling up for a little bit. We'll also want to level up our illusion skill as we go, but if we do that, we'll level up way too fast, since illusion is very easy to level. So unfortunately, it's just going to slow you down if you bother to level up for this first section, which is why I don't recommend leveling up until after you get into the Arcane University. This is the order in which we want to visit the guild halls: Skingrad, Breville, Leyawiin, back to Skingrad, Bruma, Cheydinhal, Coral, and finally Anvil. There's definitely some flexibility here, but the first 3 are pretty important, and there's a good reason for most of the others as well. First, we'll start with Skingrad. Before we do just about anything else, we'll want to buy all the weakness spells, specifically weakness to magic from Vig the Cautious, as well as weakness to fire, weakness to frost, and weakness to shock from Silenus Vacinus. You probably need gold here. Luckily, there's a store to sell stuff too, right across the street from the guild. Next, we'll want to get the quest to rescue Earthor, and it is crucial we talk to Adrienne before we leave, as she will give us an extremely magicka efficient spell called Weak Fireball. This spell costs only about as much as the basic flare spell, despite doing 3 times as much damage, so we can very easily kill enemies like basic wolves by casting weakness to fire, and then spamming this spell. It can also of course be used to great effectiveness against the zombies in Bleakflat's Cave. These zombies scale with level, so staying level 1 for this might be really helpful, and it also means that the basic Turn Undead spell that we start with can be used against them to make it even easier. Once you've rescued Earthor, the important thing is that you don't bring him back, as he will prove extremely useful for the Leyawiin quest. Before that though, we may want to stop at the Bravo Mages Guild and take care of that quest. While we are here, we'll want to pick up at least an invisibility spell, some charm spells, and optionally we can also pick up a fury spell and a chameleon spell as well, which will be extremely crucial for a trick later. For the quest itself, you can either charm the guy and buy the staff, or you can fury him and then loot the key off his corpse and then find it in his basement. Next up is the Leyawind Mages Guild, and this will send us to Fort Blueblood. This dungeon is inhabited by marauders, which are like bandits, except that some of them can cast spells. Just like the zombies in Bleak Flats Cave, these enemies scale with your level pretty strongly, so you'll ideally want to be level 1. By around level 3, it starts to get impractical to even do the quest without custom spells. Luckily, if you are level 1 to 3, the weak fireball spell from Skingrad, as well as Earthor, should be enough to take them out. For dealing with Kalthar, you can paralyze him with the Serpent Stone, but this quest is much, much easier if you just go invisible. His AI is programmed to focus on you, to the point where if you go invisible, he'll just ignore Earthor. Invisibility isn't strictly necessary here, but it does make it so much easier that I have to recommend going to Bravil before Leyawind. Once that's taken care of, we can very easily drop off Earthor whenever we feel like it. We could also use him for the Anvil quest or the Coral quest, but assuming we are low level, we won't need him for either of these, and if we're higher level, he'll be less useful than just going invisible. Next, I recommend Bruma. You'll want to do this one after Bravil, so you can charm Volinaro. And then after that is the Cheydinhal Mages Guild, which you'll want to do after Bruma, since Volinaro gives you an open spell for easy locks, which you'll need for the quest. You'll also probably want a feather spell as well, which is why we took the alteration skill in character creation. The last two quests, Coral and Anvil, are pretty self-explanatory. You can level up destruction against weak enemies like wolves, and worst case scenario, invisibility can be easily used to solve them. At this point, we're ready to go to the Arcane University. Hopefully you've been leveling illusion and destruction as much as you can, because you'll need both of them for the next trick. Oh, and of course, you can also level up your character as well, focusing on intelligence, willpower, and endurance. I don't really recommend worrying about efficient leveling, and while you're here, you will probably want to create a custom destruction leveling spell. 3 points of weakness to fire for 1 second on self is pretty good, and because destruction is so tough to level, you will probably want to be spamming this as you go along once you've maxed out illusion. You could also consider using trainers, such as Delphine Gend, in the Bravil Mages Guild. Anyway, for the actual trick, you want to make at least 2 custom spells, and you have a decent number of options, but they all rely on the same principle. The basic premise of these spells is the concept of weakness stacking, the basic idea here being that weakness to magic effects stack with each other multiplicatively. You want to make 2 custom spells, and the most basic and simple version is 100% weakness to any element and 100% weakness to magic, each for 3 seconds. 1 and 2 seconds might be usable, but in my opinion, the duration is simply too short to make use of. It's also important to understand that on-touch spells cast faster than on-target ones as well, so if you're doing this at a range, you'll want to consider a longer duration. And lastly, of course, you'll need a basic damage spell with a corresponding element, such as the fire, frost, or shock spells that the character starts the game with. It's also crucial to know that the order of the weakness effects should probably be weakness to element, and then weakness to magic. Putting the weakness to magic effect first may cause it to not work, depending on the version of the game you are playing. In my testing, it seemed to not affect anything, but I can't promise that that's always the case in every scenario. Now, if the duration is as short as 3 seconds, you'll basically need Chameleon to pull it off, so add a 100% Chameleon effect for 2 seconds. This is a smart way to do things because it also means enemies will sort of just stand in place and let you cast it several times in a row without issues. Otherwise, enemies tend to run around randomly and can be difficult to hit or aim at, so this makes our lives much easier. Allies, of course, will ruin this, but that's just Oblivion for you, and you can just wait for them to get knocked down. The Chameleon effect is pretty expensive, even for only 2 seconds, so hopefully you have really high illusion skill at this point. Another issue with the Chameleon effect is that it turns a custom spell into an illusion spell, which is a problem because you would rather be leveling your destruction at this point. To fix this, you can bring the weakness to magic effect up to 5 seconds. This will obviously make the spell cost more, but the weakness effect will cost enough to make the spell a destruction spell, so you can continue to level up your destruction as you use the spell. So how it works is you cast spell number 1, and then spell number 2, and then back to spell number 1, and then back to spell number 2, of course, and so on and so forth. By alternating the spells like this, you stack the damage multiplier infinitely, but most enemies are only going to require you to stack the effect up to 5 times. Using this, you can pretty easily kill even Mehrunes Dagon at the end of the game. All you do is invisibility up to the enemies, alternate between spell number 1 and spell number 2, cast the damage spell, and then invisibility again and wait for your magicka to recharge. The main downside to the whole thing is that it requires fast fingers, so while I am a huge fan of this, it does of course have the massive downside that you have to rapidly switch between the 2 different weakness spells. In a future video, I'll cover how to set it up in such a way that it's less execution intensive, but for now, this is the easiest way to do it. And if you flub your keystrokes, you can of course always just reload your game and try it again. I know I did that plenty of times. There is of course one other major downside to the strategy, that being enemies with spell absorption and reflection. This is yet another reason why I highly recommend using invisibility and chameleon to help facilitate this character, as it can already be quite tough to gauge how many weakness effects you've applied to enemies with absorption and reflection. Ultimately, there's no easy fix, and you'll have to rely on saving and loading with these enemies, as far as I can tell. Even when you cast a weakness spell 15 times, if the enemy absorbs or reflects the weakness to magic effect the right number of times, the damage spell can still fail to kill the enemy, or the enemy will just absorb the damage spell at the end. And this is just the Achilles heel of the entire strategy. Less problematic is Dispel. Some enemies will also dispel some of your weakness effects, but eventually they'll run out of mana, so it's not so big an issue. Resistance to magic is one more thing that can cause you issues, but unless an enemy has 100% resistance to magic, your weakness stacking will work just fine. And as far as I know, there's only one enemy in the entire game that's immune to magic, and it's one of the fights in the arena, so you won't be able to complete that quest, at least without switching to something else. Worst case scenario, if you're struggling to kill an enemy, as long as they can't heal, you don't necessarily have to be able to one-shot them. One thing I did try was to make my custom weakness spells include all 3 elements, which does increase the cost, but not by that much, and then a damage spell that also has all 3 elements on it, the theory being that the enemy is less likely to absorb or reflect everything you are throwing at it. Unfortunately, if the enemy still absorbs the wrong number of weakness effects, it won't work, so if the 3 element spells are more consistent against enemies which absorb or reflect, it wasn't especially discernible to me in my testing. But since most enemies die pretty easily after 5 stacked weakness effects, it doesn't really matter which one you go with. One last thing I tried was using a stronger damage spell. Now, ordinarily you want your damage spells to be really weak for 2 reasons. The first one is so that if the enemy reflects the spell back onto you, you obviously don't take that much damage. But also, damage just costs more than weakness effects, so there's simply no point. But there's one damage spell in the game that's extremely cost efficient, that being Wizard's Fury from the Mage's Guild questline. With this spell, you can cast 1 fewer weakness spells against an enemy, but that's really more trivia than anything else, and I've died a few times reflecting my own Wizard's Fury back at myself. So that's basically everything. Another downside to this whole strategy is your character will level up really slow because of how slow it is to level up Destruction. So if you want to level up to fight certain enemies, or for certain leveled items, you can always spam Conjuration spells to level up pretty quickly, and that will also help you increase your intelligence when you do level up. Speaking of which, your level up should always be intelligence, willpower, and endurance. All the other stats are useless. When those start getting maxed out, you can start putting them into speed or luck, but at that point the rest of your stats just don't matter. Next I'm going to talk about the Great Gate. As usual, Martin is a huge pain, and once again, the easiest and most simple way to keep him alive is to cast a custom chameleon 100% effect on him. As for Paradise, weirdly the bands of the Chosen seem to break the chameleon effect, so you'll have to just invisibility past those enemies until Eldamil takes him off for you. And as for Mankar Cameron, he can of course be an issue with spell absorption and reflection, but for me he died comedically to Eldamil's shock spells, so I guess I just got lucky with the weakness effects. Killing Raven and Ruma Cameron right beforehand makes it a tiny bit easier, as if this character really needed it. Okay, and that's all you need to know more or less about Destruction and weakness stacking, and I know that I again relied upon Illusion for this, but it's worth going over to illustrate that you can tack Chameleon and Invisibility onto custom spells to make them even more broken. In a future video, I'll go over advanced spellcasting without Illusion, but it's significantly more work to pull off, and it does feel less efficient, so it meshes better with some other jankier strategies this game has to offer, and so I'll save it for that. Lastly, I'd like to thank Akis Herseg, Schneller Herring, and the Old Knight, all of these guys from YouTube who taught me various tricks for this game, and of course the UESP and fandom wikis, which are invaluable resources, and thanks for watching.